true leaves, so the seedlings will get quite big before we transplant them, and we don't want them to run out of nutrients from the soil that's in the tray before we transplant it outside. Here we're using leaf compost. I think you can use anything that's a good organic soil or compost mix. You shouldn't use something like peat moss or coconut coir, because there's no nutritive value in those substances. So even though you also want the soil to be relatively fine, this is about as coarse as you'd want it. The reason why you want it to be fine is just so that the seeds kind of get situated and they get a lot of access to the nutrients that are in the soil. Okay, so here we have 4 different types of seeds. So what I typically recommend is you don't do more than 4 types of seeds. You can do less. Like you could do a full tray that's just a single seed type. And I also recommend that you pick the seeds based off how long they're gonna take to grow. So if you were growing something slow like herbs, and then you wouldn't put that in the same tray as something like peas, which germinate very quickly and are ready to transplant almost immediately. So I'll just show you quickly what I've selected for today, just to give you a variety. I've got some beets, which are considered medium-sized seeds, peas, which are the snap peas, which are considered large-sized seeds, and I'll show you these in a minute. Japanese long cucumbers, which are also long seeds, and then Lola Rosa cutting lettuce. So these are 4 different plant families, but you can do very easily the same plant family in a tray. The only thing I would recommend is if you have 2 of the same type, like 2 tomatoes, that you kind of separate them so that you don't get overlap, where you might get one of the tomatoes that you accidentally planted a little bit further over, and then you don't know which variety it is. So let's say you had 2 tomatoes and 2 peppers. I would go tomato, pepper, tomato, pepper. So if you think about your tray, one side is a whole, then if you're doing 4 varieties like we are today, then you kind of want to divide that in half. So I just put these sticks as quick place markers for quickly dividing this into 4 sections. So it's very easy for us to visually divide things in half. So I kind of will put 1 stick here in the middle. So I'll put Amish snap in the middle, and you can also put string if you find that that's a more effective way to be able to separate them, the different sections. So then I'll visually subdivide it again and stick another one in the quarter side. On the other side I'll stick again in the quarter. Now you at this point you got to figure out which direction am I going, and I'm gonna go to the right of the stick here. So whatever I'm planting for this variety that the stick describes, the popsicle stick, it's going to go to the right of there. So I'm going to put the last stick in the corner here. So I'm going to plant here for the first variety, which is the beets, the Permaculture, then the lettuce, then the snap peas, and then the cucumber. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what the seeds look like. So I'll start with large seeds. So most legume seeds, corn seeds, these may look like they're small, but in the world of seeds, these are actually pretty big. So like a kidney bean or something like that would be bigger than this, but this is still considered a pretty big seed. So the general rule of thumb, most people when they plant seeds, they plant them too deep. But if you want effective germination, what you really want to do is plant the seed about no deeper than about 2 times the size of the seed. So I'll show you lettuce here in a minute, which is a very small seed. You're literally sprinkling that on the top of the surface of the soil. But for a large seed like this, what you want to be doing is, depending on the size of the seed, you're going to be spacing the seeds in rows, staggered rows in each section. So, next, which one is the peas?
Sorry, this is the Feuerkugel.
What's the peas?
The peas are this one here.
Okay, so we'll start with the peas. What I like to do, and it depends, you might need to just pre-water your soil just a little bit if it's too dry, but this is fine. So what I like to do, you can either take a dibber or you can take your finger, and you make little indents where you're going to be putting the peas, so that you can do this a little faster. So I was just to explain what a dibber is. So a dibber is just a nice way to make a hole that's quite consistent. And this is more useful for when you're doing transplants, but you could use it also for starting seeds. So I'm going to use my finger because it's much faster.
Okay.
So I just go along here, and I want to space this depending on the size of the seed. You know, like if you had a big kidney bean, you might only put in, I'd say 5 or 6 per row. But a pea is pretty small, so you're making like probably 7 or 8 holes per row. So you can see 4, 5, 6, 7. Then what you do, you shift over a little bit, and then you stagger the holes. So see how it's not exactly lined up? It's kind of a zigzag. And you don't want it really any deeper than this. So you can see already, I have probably got about 35, 40 holes for plants here. So that's 40 separate pea plants that if I get 100% germination, which, you know, I'll probably get pretty good.
24 holes.
Oh, Nikki counted them. Well, I could have put them a little closer.
Closer, yeah.
Yeah, but if you think about it, it's 24 pea plants in a quarter of a tray, where you get pretty good germination. So you can imagine you can get really good yields if you start your seeds in a tray and then transplant them outside. So then with big seeds, it's pretty easy. You just plop in the seed in the hole, and I'll just go down here. You only want to put 1 seed per hole. I can see why I didn't space that second row very well. And this is kind of time consuming, and you're like, oh, why am I doing this? But in the end, when you get a bunch of perfectly spaced plants, then you'll be like, oh wow, this was worth it. Okay, so that's peas. So at this point, you could cover it, but I typically don't do it until I'm done with a tray. But I'll just show you how you would cover this. So what I do, before you're watering it, you just kind of lightly brush it back and forth so you're covering the seed. So you can see they're not very deep at all. In some cases I might need to even push them a little bit. But just with a light kind of brushing movement back and forth, you're covering all your seeds. Okay, so now I'm going to go to a medium seed, which is a beet. You can see this. So it's still visible. You can individually see the seeds, but but they're not so small that you're going to have a lot of trouble putting them individually in a hole.
Beets are here.
So the same thing with beets. I'm making a bunch of holes, and I might not do the whole section here because I'm mostly just trying to show you the difference. It's the same thing that we went through with the peas. Whoops, I just dropped one. But you just take the time to put 1 seed per hole. One thing I want to point out with beets and spinach, Swiss chard, not spinach, but Swiss chard, these seeds are cluster seeds. So you could place these perfectly spaced, and then you're wondering, why am I seeing little clumps of seedlings come up? It's because the way that the beet produces the plant, this is actually 3 seeds in what's called a cluster seed. So you don't have to worry too much. You can just thin it when you're doing the transplanting. So I'm not going to finish the medium seed because I want to move on to the small seeds. So these are what you're going to find is most herbs and flower seeds are they can be they'll be very small. They can even look like they're dust because they're so fine. So theoretically, you could place these things individually, but practically it's not going to happen.
The lettuce seeds are here.
Okay, so lettuce and a lot of the smaller seeds actually require sunlight to germinate. So you don't really want to be covering them. So you can see this is the size of a lettuce seed. Oh, I dropped a few in there. It's a little sloppy.
It's a bit cold.
Okay, so these are still, you can kind of individually pick them out, but flower seeds you would, or some of the herb seeds you wouldn't be able to pick out. So with lettuce seeds, because they require sunlight, I'm not going to place individual holes. I'm just going to kind of evenly distribute them on the surface of the section that I'm planting them in. And you might think, oh, you know, they're never going to germinate if they're on the surface. But what happens is we're going to water the tray after this. When you water the tray, the water will kind of, because the soil is not compacted, the seeds will kind of sink into the soil. And then they'll be fine, they'll germinate without any problem. So you want to be even in your distribution of how you're sprinkling the seeds. So however many seeds you have. So you might think, oh, okay, these are way too close once they grow. And you're right with that. So what you do is once they're about 1 or 2 inches tall, you're going to start thinning them a little bit. But luckily, with these smaller seeds, they're a little more flexible with the space that you have to grow them. So they're used to growing close together. So when you do separate them, you generally won't damage their roots so much. I'll just finish this. So you can see here in a small space, I'm probably going to get, if I get decent germination on this, I'll probably get about 100 lettuce plants from that one small section. So you can see if you take care of a tray like this and you water it until it's ready to transplant, you can easily get 50 to 100 pounds of possible harvest from a single seed starting tray. Okay, finally I just wanted to demonstrate how you would water these things and take care of them. So, can I pause?
You can just...
Echo. No, not yours. No, it's not yours. You can't remember.
It doesn't even have a head on it.
Here's the head.
Oh,
Hang
God.
on.
Yes, we did roll it.
You want to get a different one? That's not going to work.
Right, let's just put... Phoebe was able to do it. Okay. There we go. There you
Yeah,
are.
so I'll start again.
My hands are now dirty.
Okay, so now I'm going to demonstrate how we would water our plants. The first time after you've planted a tray, you want to water the soil to not flooding, but almost to saturation, because you're trying to jumpstart and trigger the emergence of that seed. After that, what I recommend is that you water every other day. You put the tray in either a very sunny place, like in a bay window, or you can purchase like an LED grow light. We found that that's very effective. You don't have to worry about the light so much initially until the seeds start to germinate. But what you really don't want is leggy seeds. So if you get a grow light, you want to be placing it about 12 to 18 inches above the surface of the tray, so that you get a good exposure to like a broadband light. So here I'm just going to demonstrate watering. So you can see how I'm kind of evenly going back and forth. And I'm pretty heavily watering. When I water on a every other day basis, I'm not going to be watering as heavily as I am that first day. So just to kind of sum up, that once your seeds germinate, you want to be waiting until they have at least 4 or 5 true leaves. So the first set of leaves that come from a plant when they germinate are called cotyledon leaves. They're kind of remnants of the seed, and they're just providing nourishment to the plant. So those aren't considered true leaves yet. They won't look like the leaves that the plant will produce after that. So once you get the true leaves, you want typically at least 3 or 4 of those leaves before you transplant them outside. There are a few exceptions. If you have something that has a deep tap root, a single root that goes down. So in this case, we've got snap peas. So what it'll do is it'll very quickly germinate, and then it puts all of its effort to send a single tap root down. And in a tray like this, that root will hit the bottom and it'll start moving all over the place. So what I do with things like legumes, corn as a single tap root, I'm just trying to get them to germinate. Okra is another example. So I'll plant them until I get just a little bit of growth. So they haven't even really produced any leaves yet, or they're just starting to produce their first set of leaves. And then I'll immediately transplant them outside. So you get a real jump start. You might wonder why you do that. You can easily get 2 weeks jump start by getting that germination in the tray, as opposed to direct sowing them. But the only thing is you got to be quick about transplanting them outside, because you want them to develop that deep tap root in the place where they're going to eventually grow.
Any last tips?
I think that's all I have for now. So the other thing I would recommend is when you transplant outside, you might want to not transplant everything that you have in the tray. A good example is now it's the spring, so that we get some cooler weather that's a little bit unexpected. So unless you're hardening the plants off outside a lot before you transplant them, if you're not quite sure whether your plants are going to survive, then you would only transplant half of your plants, and that way you keep the other plants inside, and it's kind of like a backup. If some of the inclement weather affects those plants and they die back, then you still have a bunch of plants that you can transplant in when the weather gets warmer.
Thank you. All right. Any questions? Let me look at the chat.
It's very odd watching myself.
He was sick on that day and it was so cold outside. Um, yes. So Geraldine says hi
I'm
from
not seeing the chat.
Hi, right there.
Oh, okay.
Hi from New Mexico. Unfortunately, I'm in the desert with little water, so I can only garden vicariously. Looking to move soon. I think you can still grow something in the desert. Even if you start off with microgreens and keep those indoors for about 2 weeks, you'll have something to eat in 1 to 2 weeks with microgreen seeds, Geraldine. And also you can start with things that are seasonally appropriate, especially this time of year for you
We
might
have a good
in
friend
pots,
who lives in
Arizona.
Arizona, which is a similar climate, and I think the hardest thing in a climate like that is just getting the seedlings established. So as long as you can, it's really a timing thing with a climate like that, where um, there are times where it's cooler, and if you can get the plants that are kind of appropriate for that climate, if you get them established early on, when it is a little cooler, and when it gets hotter, then they can kind of deal with that a little bit better than if you're trying to start seeds in the midst of the heat.
One thing too is that your season is different from the rest of the states. So for instance, your tomatoes will come in February, but you would have to have planted them in like August, September, something like that, later in not now. So you're looking at different crops that and maybe even different varieties that you may not have considered. Lemongrass or things that would really love the heat that are herbs, peppers that might be. And in the end, it really is about the soil. So just wanted to also emphasize that, and that even in a desert, the soil is really important, especially in a desert. And whoa, good questions. Okay, great question.
So we have Lee's.
What, Jody, would you talk about hardening off, please?
Okay. So when you're ready to transplant, your your plants will look good in these trays. Um, but because the environment that you're growing indoors is not the environment that you're going to grow them outdoors, you can kind of think of it like the plant is now doing it's moving house. And when we move house, it's quite stressful. So you want to make that as easy of a move as possible for the plant. So what you're doing with hardening off is you're kind of climatizing that plant before you move it into its new home. So um, what you typically do is you do it gradually. Um, you'll put the tray or maybe a pot that you have your plant in outside for a few hours each day. It's a little bit of work, but what you're trying to really avoid, the plants are not really used to wind, especially. So you're just trying to get it used to both the temperature and the kind of environmental forces that are moving across your garden. And then after a couple, and you should probably bring it in at night if that's possible. So you put it outside in the morning and bring it inside and at
Jody's
night.
in California, so might not, do you think, around San Francisco?
I think it also, I mean, it depends on the plants as well. You know, some plants are a little more tolerant
What are you planting,
to
Jody?
nighttime temperatures.
When, and some of them would probably, I think around now they could.
Yeah, so it's also like if you're in the summer and you're doing fall plants, then um, it's probably going to be a little easier to harden off your plants. But if you're doing,
Yeah.
if you have a very temperate climate and it gets cold for a long time, you know, like if you're in Wisconsin, it's cold for a long time and then it gets hot. But in certain parts of California, it's more of a gradual temperature change. So I would say you don't need to harden off your plants for more than about a week maximum to kind of do that. The other thing you can do is when you're transplanting them, you give them extra water, um, like water every day. You also ideally want to put a little bit of mulch or cover so that you're protecting them from the wind and the sun initially.
And when we transplant, I try to keep as much of the root soil around that root that I'm transplanting together with it, because then whatever by microorganisms are already doing well with that plant, you can bring them with along with. But great question, Jody. Um, Lee's Metzger. I'm in Virginia and I haven't even started. I've got, that's okay. As Asclepius tuberosa seeds in the fridge, getting cold and hardy. They should be ready to seed soon. Great, thanks for sharing.
I'm not even familiar with that.
I'm sure, yeah,
Asclepius tuberosa.
what is the common name?
Well,
This is something
it's
that
a
we
good
need to
thing that we
know.
can talk about as
It's good that you're using the Latin
sometimes
name
for more
because
rare seeds, especially perennials, you'll see something that says it requires
wildflower, butterfly
scarification
weeds.
or stratification. So I can
Yeah,
explain what those.
butterfly weed
Oh, it's
seed.
milkweed, kind
Yeah,
of.
butterfly seeds, butterfly weeds.
Okay.
I thought it was a flower. Yeah.
Now, I'll explain what those two terms mean first. So, scarification means that the seed covering is very tough and it's it's expecting either like a physical sanding or grading of the seed coat in order to kind of trigger the germination of that seed. And then stratification is that the seed is kind of programmed to expect a temperature change. So it's looking for some very cold temperatures followed by some warm temperatures in order to trigger that germination. So in the case of what Lisa is doing is that's probably a seed that is triggered by the stratification. So it's just looking for some cold temperatures. You mostly, I would say most annuals, you don't have to do that. It's only for your kind of longer lived.
Echinacea, the ones that grow that come back again perennial.
And quite often, only with very difficult to germinate seeds do you need to do that. So even if it says stratification for echinacea or whatever, I've I've found that it's only for the very difficult to germinate seeds that you have to do anything.
Mm.
So there's certain very weird things like I'm trying to think like if you're growing sunberries or certain things from seed that you would aren't even normally grown from seed typically.
Like strawberries, things like that.
Yeah, but yeah. Well, strawberry, the problem is it's very small and it takes a while. Um, but anyway, I was explaining. So
Digress.
her,
There's
yeah.
no question. Thanks, Liz. Christine asks, can you talk more about the distance of the grow light from the seedlings? I have read that they should be just a couple inches from the light. Also, how many hours a day should you keep the grow light on in a space that virtually gets no sun? So I would say if you're growing microgreens and your aim is to have the seedlings grow tall, then we put the distance, we have a greater distance between the light so that the microgreen grows up to the light. And sometimes we put the microgreen on the bottom shelf and have them grow up taller. That way it's easy to cut. If you are growing something for oh, let me see, at the same time, I don't like transplanting things where I can't, it's hard to handle and they're all close to the ground and soil. So I do have a little distance. Right now, the distance we have 24 inches or so between our, how, what is it?
So yeah, a lot depends on the output of your grow light. So there's most people will be using three different types of grow lights. You have fluorescent lights. These are kind of the things you see in that are tubes. They have gas in them, and the problem with them is they get very hot. So if you put them too close, then they'll actually your plants will suffer from the heat, not so much the light of the fluorescent. So nowadays we generally sorry the other two types would be
LED.
LED grow lights, and I'll get to that in a minute. And the third one just went out of my head, so I'll just skip that one. But LED grow lights, the nice thing is that they have an effective output, which is higher than the usage, the watt usage, power usage. So what we use are quite powerful 100 watt. They're 2 by 2, um, in about 2 feet by 2 feet, and they can cover a rack. So I can do 4 of those 10-20 trays under a single 2 by 2 grow light, and I may have to occasionally rotate those trays if I start. You just need to observe the seedlings, and if you see them kind of reaching towards the light, then you can rotate the trays. What you're just trying to avoid, the easiest way to tell the distance of your grow light is if you start seeing you're watching the seedlings, and if they're really desperately leaning one way or another, then your light is probably too far away from the soil.
What if they're getting yellow?
So that's typically a different problem. That's the soil.
That's not the light, you
Yeah, it's
think?
generally not the light.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes I think it's the light, but okay. Um, Also, how many hours a day should you keep the grow light on? And that's we half a day. We usually do like half a day, or
So
no, a half a day, or sometimes the whole
yeah, I
day
would say no
and
more
turn it
than
off.
about 12 hours and no less than 8.
Hmm.
So somewhere between 8 to 12 hours.
Yeah. And what would you suggest if there isn't a good spot to keep the seeds? Our warm places are not in the sun. Ray, hello from Colorado. What would you suggest if there isn't a good spot to keep the seeds? So what we did at one point is um, we used our south facing windows, and Dave had built ledges for the trays on the south facing windows before we had a grow light basement set up. And then we also um, I know a friend of mine who she would, during seed starting season, she would put out an extra ironing board up, and that's where she would put the seed trays in lieu of putting a permanent you know, permanent ledge there by the sunny window. So our warm places are not in the sun.
So
Yeah, some people do it in the bathroom. For some reason, the bathroom was a really good place to do it. Lots of light.
one other recommendation I can give is that you can buy this thing. It's a passive heat mat. So
Yeah.
it doesn't heat it very much, but you put it underneath the tray and it heats, it's supposed to heat up things about 10 degrees warmer, which quite often is just enough to get things to germinate. Um, and then the only thing you got to worry about with that's really good for things that are looking for the heat to germinate. So if you want to, you've planted pepper seeds or tomato seeds and you're wondering why are these things not germinating after weeks, then if you put that heat mat, I find that's a really good way to get them to germinate. The only thing you got to worry is because the bottom of the tray heats up a little bit as well. It doesn't heat up much, but it heats up enough that it starts to dry things out a bit faster. So you've got to water a bit more than you would normally.
That's right. Thanks. Is it okay, Adele asks, to use fish tank water to water seedlings after they develop true leaves? I use coir and perlite to start seeds. So we had a video that we made for Mother Earth News. I should dig that up and share that one time. And it was, if you are a member of Mother Earth News, you should be able to find it. It's called the Growing at Home or something of that sort. But one of the examples we had was we grew lettuces and beets on top of a fish tank floating on an actual like living room fish tank. Directly getting all the water started in the seeds were started in the fish tank, in some sort of foam. What was it that you used as the thing that carried
Oh,
it?
so those were that was almost aquaponics. So there was no
Yes,
soil.
there's no soil
They
for
were
that.
just dangling.
Yeah, and if I were at home, I still have in my office a little setup that you can buy from for kids actually. It's called what is it? Grow Back to Roots. Back to Roots sells a little aquaponic setup where you can start your seedlings and grow microgreens on top. And if you have a beta fish, the beta fish died while we were on this trip. um, but you can grow seedlings right on top using the fish water
Oh,
directly.
oh, okay.
Yes,
My son-in-law has keeps changing the water and bringing me over these gallons, but I wanted to make sure it was safe to use.
I
yeah,
think
it's
as
very
long as you're
nutritious.
feeding the whatever you're feeding the fish, as long as it's
Well, I'm using them in my trays, once they get, because I use the core and the perlite, which, like as you said, has no nutrients.
Mhm.
So when they got their second set of leaves, I've been trying to use some of that fish tank water to give them a little fertilization. So we'll see what's happening. I
That's a
mean, things are
great,
growing.
that's a great idea that you did.
yeah,
You
I
know,
think they're um it's worth trying. There's a lot of nutrients that are produced by the
as
fish.
they always say, kelp and fish
Exactly.
emulsion and all of that. So this
You
is free.
exactly you connected the dots, and that's a close. If you think about it, that's more than aquaponics, really. What is that aquaponics versus
Aquaponic, yeah.
hydroponics? Okay, so
Hydroponics.
hydroponics is like linear because you have to keep on adding those amendments, right? But the
Right.
aquaponics is the poop is making it, making that a cyclical closed system, and you don't have to do anything somewhat. So that's similar.
I'm
got.
not sure if
I
connection
hope.
is
Yeah,
bad.
our connection is probably bad. But the coconut coir was
Oh
what.
gosh, use it on your own property.
Yeah,
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 coconut coir and perlite is what I use.
very good.
So one handy tip that I have for determining whether your seedlings are getting everything that they need is when you do the transplant, what you're looking at is you want the top growth, the growth above the ground, to be about the same amount as the root system underneath.
Oh, okay. That's
So
interesting. Okay,
what
thank you.
you'll see is in some cases you get great top growth and you're like, oh, I can't wait till I transplant these things outside. And then you kind of loosen the soil and you see no root. And that's
That's when you buy commercial and they force them that way. You know what I mean? When you buy them at a nursery and you think, oh no, there's no established root here. Right.
Yes,
so yeah,
exactly.
that's the worst case scenario because then it's going to be very hard when you do the transplant and the plant's having shock to then develop an extensive root system.
Mhm.
Yeah, the other one is not so bad. So you're not getting so much top growth, but you get a lot of root development. That's not so bad because
Mhm.
at least you're starting from a good base.
Well, I've been pouring it in the bottom. See, I use, put the tray in a tray. So I'm only watering from the bottom. So that might help the roots even. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah.
It
We'll see.
helps with
Keep us
the
posted.
capillary action from the root. Yeah, the makes
I
the
just want to tell you, you two are just fabulous.
Oh, Adele,
Wait,
thank you
I
so
thought
much.
you lived in Virginia. Don't you live in Virginia?
We live in Virginia, but we are traveling to
Yeah, I
Europe.
knew you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I've been
because of
there where you are.
our
I don't want
daughter
to
is
hold you
there.
up, but I live in York, Pennsylvania, just north of you. So I'm not that far, but okay, I'll let you go. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, great question. We like those fish questions. Um, Kristen asks again, my seedlings that I transplanted a couple of weeks ago are alive but barely growing. Do they need nutrients of some kind? Are these the ones, Kristen, that are what we transplanted together? Okay. Do they need nutrients of some kind? I feel like that soil was,
what were the varieties of seeds that you
it
planted?
was lettuce, kale, Swiss chard, arugula, and the parsley and
Spinach,
spinach. I would love
spinach,
to see something.
peas, and radishes. The radishes are doing really well. The peas are doing really well. The spinach, the Swiss chard, and the lettuces are all, and the kale they're just kind of not growing very much.
I would
And
give
the
them,
kale leaves are turning white, by the way.
ooh, okay. I would give them,
Can't be a good thing.
yeah, I would give them a little more time. Maybe it's the weather still and this having a lot of water. I don't know.
I mean,
What else?
you can kind of go into the break it down. So radishes are very fast germination. Like when we do the microgreens for the radishes, they're ready to harvest
In
within a
4 days.
week.
Well, in four
So
days they're too nutritious.
Okay.
it's getting a lot from the seed. So it might not be even indicative of anything with your soil.
Okay.
Same thing with peas. They get a lot from their seed. So it can, but if it sounds like with the kale, if you're having trouble with that, and lettuce, like if you're watering things and your lettuce looks good, but the Swiss chard doesn't look good, then it might just be whatever the makeup of the soil in your seed starting tray. So the two things you want to make sure is to make sure that it's fine enough. Sometimes it can be um, leaf compost, but it's not quite broken down enough. So then
Yeah.
you might need to filter it out a little bit. That would be one thing, and then sometimes it's just not the right nutrient makeup in the seed starting soil, so it'll work with certain plants but not others because they're looking for different things.
Yeah.
So I would just think it might be that if your kale leaves are starting to look bad, because that's one thing with seed starting. If the leaves start to look bad, it's generally something in the soil.
Yeah, I didn't want to, I don't know how advanced this is, but plant health pyramid. I always go back to this plant health pyramid that I Let me see if I can pull it up here and share it in the share screen. Where when we're looking at the soil, for this is sort of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs for plants. And it was put together by an Amish farmer named John Kempf. And in the initial stages of plant development, when we're trying to get complete photosynthesis in a seedling, for instance, and then after complete photosynthesis, which we a lot of times we don't even get to, they start creating their second stages to start creating proteins which help them grow. Basically, this is their growing stage. This is their like eating stage. The first stage is that we can eat as much as we can, and we're using up all the things that we eat. I'm a plant, for instance. I'm using up all the things that I eat in order to that I'm using up all that into energy. And then the second stage is all that energy is used to make me grow as a plant. The third stage is now I have enough energy to grow. The extra excess, what happens to us, even as people, it becomes fat, right? It's stored as fat. And that fat helps protect them from bugs and diseases. And this one is like they become immune, their immune system response is activated. So not only are they defended by their lipids from bugs, in this case, they can sort of actively release or exude aromas or whatnot to actually deter bugs and pests. And so the very bold statement here is healthy plants can become completely resistant to disease and insects as long as certain things are met. And those requirements for the first two stages of growth are mainly, as you can see here, like if I can make this bigger, the mineral requirements in the plants. And that's why the soil test is really important, because then we can really see, okay, your soil is lacking all the minerals and nutrients needed for photosynthesis, and all the minerals, which minerals and nutrients for protein synthesis. Now, if you don't know and you just had a soil test, or you're not sure and this is just a weird bed, and the soil test is going to come back in 2 weeks, and by that time your seedlings are dead. So we would suggest like highly mineral rich, like amendments such as the fish emulsion that Adele was talking about.
That can get expensive too. So
Yeah, that's why we don't really recommend it unless you know. But she has smaller beds, I guess,
I
or
think what you
azomite.
can, yeah, azomite is a
Azomite is
really
another one.
cost-effective way to just get a base. So it's a type of rock dust.
Yeah, azomite is a good like powder for your
Pro,
setup, Kristen. It's just two beds.
it's
It's
good.
yeah.
It's just good for trace minerals. I just want to say up front that
Mhm.
you don't get too anxious if you're having some
Yeah,
successes with your
that's good.
lettuces and peas.
Hmm.
Focus on that, and then you can figure out what's going on with the Swiss chard and
Yeah.
later on.
And sometimes it's the plants themselves that will figure it out for you. So you're doing really great, Kristen. And I have a feeling that when we see it again in May, it'll be a much different story.
There's one thing that I didn't mention in the video that I should quickly add,
Mm.
that I normally talk about with seed starting is, you generally also want to start in a single tray seeds that grow roughly at the same rates.
Mm.
So,
I think you
um,
did mention that a little
oh, I
bit.
did. Okay.
But it's good.
But
Yeah, so that
yeah, so
you're not destroying the root system or disturbing the root system so much when you transplant them out.
well, there's also certain expectations. Like if you're growing rosemary, it might take like 2 months before you have something that you could transplant.
Yeah.
And if you're putting that next to something that's growing much
Peas.
faster,
Yeah.
it can be kind of demoralizing when you're looking at the rosemary and there's nothing that's really happening. So the only reason I mentioned that is with the Swiss chard. Some Swiss chard initially takes a little longer to get going than the other things that you mentioned. So that might be I don't know with the kale, but with the Swiss chard, that might be just the case of it needs a little bit more time.
I just want to
Thank
thank. Oh, you're welcome. And I just want to thank, we have master gardeners and master naturalists here on the call that are helping chime in, and people with permaculture degrees. So I'm looking at you, Steve, and Vivian, and all the people who are, so thank you, Steve, for reminding us. Zizotes is a variety of true milkweed that monarchs require for caterpillar food. So just make sure that your milkweeds, just a reminder to use North American native species, if that's the reason that you're growing your milkweed, is to support the monarch butterflies. Okay, bye, Rachel. And then can you talk a bit more about, what soil to use when starting? Yes. So I try to keep it simple. Dave, you use mostly, what do you use?
But I think,
Leaf compost, right?
yeah, for us it was very helpful. We've been doing microgreens for about a year, and that's kind of useful to just see how much of an effect having a decent all-around soil is that um, the plants will germinate and generally look a lot healthier if you have a complete soil mix. So what we found is that um, it 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 doesn't matter so much if it's um, the brand or whatever of the organic soil. It's more like that that it is soil that at one point it was alive. It's probably not going to be alive if it comes from a bag, but I mean that's
You can
fine.
inoculate it. Okay, so soil made up of three components: the biological, which is the life in the soil, the chemical, which are the mineral nutrients we talked about, such as the ones found in azomite, and then the third is like the structure of it. So what happens is, if for instance you're using what you have a bag of soil, let's say, now Miracle Grow creates organic soil mixes nowadays too, and that's all you have. um, you use that and then you try to inoculate it with some life. So either add mycorrhizal fungi or compost. So what I do is I just take my vermicompost, because my study right now is I have a research study on compost tea, and I'm really learning so much about the gut of the red regular compost worm, and how diverse bacterially their gut is, and how much when they poop the soil, they eat the soil and things, and they poop that out of their system, it's so rich in life. And so half of my compost, not half, but maybe like a quarter maybe of it, is vermicompost castings, because of that reason. And sometimes it will be half, because if it's compost that's already finished, that's what I use. And then the other half, and that's more nitrogeny, more bacterially dominant. And then the other half is um, native soil or leaf mulch, which we have a big truckload of in our house. So it's like the carbon heavy and then the nitrogen rich. And I think the ideal would be like a third of each of those. One third worm castings, one third native soil, because then you get what you natively have. And it may not be the best condition, maybe dry, clay, alkaline, but it does have some of that life in the soil that's native to your property. And so when you do that transplant later on, the veggies aren't shocked. So you have like one third native, one third vermicompost, and one third leaf grow is the brand that we have for sometimes for leaf mulch, something that's more carbony. And that's the formula I have. Or I do just vermicompost and leaf mulch, if that's simpler to remember.
Yeah, I think with your comment about the structure, that's really good. Is that in the tray when you're watering it, you'll notice a couple things that you can kind of like a feedback. If
Hmm.
if you're watering and the water is just sitting there on the top of the surface, if it's not
Floating.
getting absorbed, then that means that it's probably not broken down enough. Uh,
That's your coconut coir base. So for months we were doing microgreens with a coconut coir based pro mix, which is organic, everything, because we didn't want any fungi. And and then the germination is so poor, the water wouldn't go down. So like that penetration of water is also a signal for you to say, this is good soil. It's going down, it's getting absorbed. Soil will absorb like, I can't remember anymore what the 3 times more, 6 times more. If you have biochar in there, even more. So
And the opposite end of that is if you have very heavy clay soil that you kind of dug the topsoil, then it'll just compact in the tray and it'll become really dense. And the problem with that then is not so much the nutrients, the problem is you get anaerobic conditions because there's no oxygenation, there's no, you know, plants' roots need air as well. So there's no air channels. And then that's typically when you might see, you know, there's plenty of nutrients in the soil, but your leaves are turning yellow or other colors.
So sometimes we'll sift that soil if we have time. We'll sift that mix and then we'll sift it so it's even finer and then, the plants can germinate really quickly. Great question, Liz. Geraldine, thank you so much for this. I've got some lavender seeds and I'll start today. Okay, lavender seeds are one of those herbs that are long term. So if it doesn't grow in like a month, that's perfectly normal. We have a large half wine barrel style plastic planter inside, which we would like to use for growing. Any suggestions for a good combo of seeds for indoor growing? We have a ridiculously short, yes, in Colorado and pretty bad native soil. So I'm hoping growing an indoor barrel. Yes. So you could do indoor lettuces even. One of our members was growing indoor lettuces, indoor herbs, um, good combo of seeds,
You
flowers.
could grow there's certain things that do well indoors. I don't understand why,
And then the
but
short dwarf versions of the long ones, like dwarf peas will grow indoors. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
oh, that's fine. Things like we found ginger and turmeric
Grow well
can grow
indoors.
well indoors, even though I think it's because they store a lot of their nutrients in their rhizomes, and then they're a little more you know, the conditions inside tend to be a little drier. That's the problem. So the plants that you grow inside, uh, it's not necessarily the light that's the problem, but the soil will generally get dry. So what we recommend is also if you can grow enough in the pot that it's kind of covering the pot so you don't get so much evaporation.
Yeah.
And that's also kind of helpful to establish a mini ecosystem.
Yeah, great questions, everyone. We're at the top of the hour. Um, it was lovely to chat with everybody. I hope that this was helpful. Was this helpful to everybody? Are you gonna tell us in the chat, yay, what, if you haven't yet, what you are seed starting this coming week? Because in 2 weeks, we will check in with you again with another webinar where we'll be live streaming from Amsterdam. Right before, was it like Amsterdam? No, I think we'll be in Germany before we go to Amsterdam. We didn't want to do that because that would be the day before we actually flew out.
Might be a little
And it
too
might be a
crazy,
little too crazy.
even for us.
So it's on the 16th, not the 17th. So the 16th, we'll be in Germany then. So we would like to see if you can come back with your trays and what are the statuses of those seedlings in 2 weeks. And don't forget our Kickstarter is still on. If you go to kickstarter.com, and thank you for all your pledges. We are so honored and grateful. And we're still hoping to hit that in a week, even though we're here and circumstances are such that we're here and not really in back in Virginia where we could manage it more. But we are so honored and blessed by you guys blessing us with your pledges. Thank you, and continue to spread the word out there. Okay, we will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for all your, yes, we will have a good time here and we'll continue sending you pictures. Bye.